Dimitri,
hi,
the other
hi, great. Can we talk afterwards? Because I'm just about to start the meeting. So, yeah, thank you. Yeah. Thanks, Rick. Okay, welcome everybody to CFRG at IEF96. My name is Kenny Patterson, and I'm one of the co-chairs of CFRG. The other co-chair, Alexei Melnikov, I think will try to join us at some point, but he's very busy in various other working groups and IESG and so on at the moment. So he's become a busy boy. So I will single-handedly chair things as best I can. We're going to start with some chair slides, giving you an update on where we are with various documents, and then we'll move to presentations. We've got a few interesting presentations coming up. The agenda's online at the usual place. All of these slides are online too, so you should have access to these and you can follow along, including the agenda there. Here's the usual IETF note well, so please note well. The blue sheet is making its way around, so please sign in as usual. Okay. So to assist with the audio streaming and the recording, please only speak using the microphones. There's various microphones positioned around the room. Please state your name before speaking in the usual way. We've got Rich Saltz has kindly volunteered to monitor the Etherpad. Thanks, Rich. And Jeff Hodges is taking some notes, and hopefully we'll put that together and make some minutes at the end. Okay. Etherpad, yeah. Okay, yeah, that's true. So Etherpad is for remote participants, but also for local participants if there's something you want to say. But better to use the mic if you're in the room. So the chairs are me and Alexei, as I already mentioned. Let's very briefly look at the document status in the research group. I apologize for the small size of the font here. We don't have any new RFCs since Buenos Aires. We don't have anything new in the editor's queue since Buenos Aires. But we have a couple of drafts that are now completed and are going for, or actually in ISRG review. The work on Edwards curve digital signatures, or EDDSA as it's informally known. We've had some interesting discussion on the list in the last few days, provoked a little bit by Jim Shad doing some implementation work. And so there'll be some clarifications, I think, to the document. But basically that's in review, and as is our document on requirements for PAKE, Password Authenticated Key Exchange. And actually Alexei and I are planning to put quite a chunk of time in the working group, or the research group, sorry, over the next 3 to 6 months into PAKE, maybe running a kind of mini competition to select a portfolio of PAKEs for use in IETF protocols. More on that later. We have a number of active drafts. I won't go through them all here, you can see them. In particular, we'll have a presentation on Argon 2 from Dimitri later on today. I had wanted to get a presentation on ASGSM SIV. Unfortunately, none of the authors could make it to the meeting. We did have a presentation on this at the Eurocrypt interim CFRG meeting that took place in Vienna back in May. And you can, there's a good slide deck available through the IETF website where you can go and see what the status of that document is. Okay, I think that's everything I want to say about these documents.
Kenny.
There's a question from Rich.
Yeah, a question on the expired
Can you just state your name?
Rich Salz.
Thanks.
Channeling from himself. On the last, the web W3C web crypto, do you know if like anyone's got plans to pick that up, or is it just quietly off into the night? If you don't know, that's, I just want to know what you know.
I think it's up to the editors or authors of that draft to revitalize it and actually come ask CFRG for help in review. And we've encouraged them to do that, and it hasn't happened yet.
Thanks.
Jim Schott, I apologize for being late. You may have said this. For the Edwards curve DSA stuff, do you feel that the context arguments have been sufficiently resolved?
I think it has, yes. I think we reached a view where we're not going to do it. That seemed to be the very rough consensus on the mailing list. So I think the documents won't change further in that respect.
Thank you.
Daniel is going to come to the mic and contradict me.
I mean, I may have missed something, but as I understood it, the documents have a context string for ED 448 and they don't for 255.19.
Right. Thank you for that clarification. But I don't anticipate further changes to the 255.19 now. It seems. Hi.
Hi, Wendy Seltzer here from W3C. Thanks to you and Rich for pointing out the lag in updates to that security guidelines, since I know that it is a critical piece to getting our web crypto work moving forward in W3C. I will prod our editors to get an update in. Thanks very much.
That would be great. Thanks, Wendy. Okay, let me move on with the slides. Good interaction so far. We are now formally going to launch a call for members of a crypto review panel to assist CFRG in document review. This was an idea that was originally suggested to the chairs by Stephen Farrell. There's a proposal that was made by the CFRG chairs. We had some feedback on that. This is not replacing any IRTF processes. It's meant to complement those processes and give the chairs extra capacity to review documents where necessary. We're now hiring, so if you're interested in being involved in this, please come talk to me or Alexi this week. We're going to formally announce on the mailing list a call for nominations, so you can self-nominate, of course, and the closing date for those nominations will be September 9th.
This is DKG. So it would be great to be clear what type of review you're looking for. Are you looking for cryptographic review? Are you looking for review in terms of how useful this would be in other IETF processes? Or
keep going.
Is it can we parse the language?
It's all of the above, basically. So we get all kinds of different submissions and documents in different states. Some stuff's very speculative. Some stuff is actually driven by a working group in IETF somewhere. So we'll need different kinds of review for different kinds of documents. Sometimes it would be a technical review. Sometimes it would be a simple language review. It can be all kinds of different things.
So my question, I guess, is if I was to nominate someone for this panel,
yes,
would I expect them to be capable of all of those kinds of reviews, or I could say, look, this person could do these kinds of reviews?
The latter. It's absolutely fine. So we're going to build, something like 6 to 8 people. And the idea would be that between that group, we would have all of the skills necessary. So we might even have some documents reviewed by more than one person in order that we cover different facets of what's required for review. Does that make sense? Good. Thank you.
Yeah, from Dan Flory on the chat, where do they send the nominations?
Oh, to the chairs, to the CFRG chairs. So you can reach out to us by email or just to cfrgchairs@irtf.org, whatever. Okay, so in some sense then this is the formal launch of the review panel, and we will follow up with a mail on the mailing list where it will then be clear where you should send your nominations. Okay, anything else anybody wants to raise at this stage? Okay, if not, we will move on then with the first presentation. Which I believe is going to be this one. How do I do full screen slideshow? Okay, so we have this draft on Argon 2 for password hashing, and the draft has had some updates recently, and somebody's moving the slides on my behalf. Dimitri is going to talk to Argon 2. Thanks, Dimitri. You have, I think, 15 minutes.
Okay, great. Hello, IETF. Great to see everyone here. Actually, I expected a bit more people, but since, probably some others went to grab some popcorn because the Ethereum hard fork will be in less than 2 hours. So it's going to be hard time. Okay, no, 50 minutes is much shorter than that. So I'm going to update you a bit about the development, about the standardization of Argon 2. It's a password hashing function developed in the University of Luxembourg with my two colleagues, Alex and Daniel. And next slide. So I already presented it remotely in Buenos Aires, so we just briefly recall why we need another password hashing function. So typically when a user authenticates himself to a remote web service, the typical factor of authentication is a password. And when you don't have a key, so users just select the name and the password, and these two parameters are stored on the web server. But the passwords, of course, are not stored in plain text, they're stored in hash form and together with salt, so that whenever users log in next time, the server matches the hash of the candidate password with the password file. The problem is that passwords files are often leaked unencrypted, and passwords typically have low entropy because that's what we can memorize. And if you just use a regular cryptographic hash function instead of age, then these hash functions are easily cracked on special hardware, even on desktops, but on special hardware too. And there is a problem how to protect weak passwords. So can we bring more security to weak passwords? Can we somewhat increase the price of entropy in weak passwords? So the problem is actually quite serious, because the dedicated hardware poses a significant threat in the future, we believe. At the example of Bitcoin, you may see the advantage of special hardware over regular laptops. For example, Bitcoin ASICs can produce 30,000 more, 30 times as many hashes per joule of energy if doing SHA-2 hashing. And our goal was to design a function that is much better than SHA-2 in this aspect, provides a much smaller advantage. So next slide, please. So we designed Argon2 to be very fast. The reason for very fast in terms it fills memory very fast, and it fills it in an uncompressible way. The reason for being fast is that the more memory you use over a current period of time means more defense. So the defense is proportional to the amount of memory you use and to the amount of time you use. So if within the same, say, 1 second, you use more memory, then the function brings more security to your passwords. We had, of course, an option to build our function even sort of stronger in some aspects, but at so high cost to performance that it didn't worth it, actually. So that was some sort of a trade-off. But the performance and the memory bandwidth is quite good compared to other functions that we competed with. So next slide, please. The memory-intensive computations, which are the important feature of Argon2, are sort of a solution against dedicated hardware, because if you're going to implement a password cracker on chip, then the memory will occupy a very good portion of your chip, much larger than the core of the hashing function. That's why with large memory on chip, the ASIC advantage in terms of energy consumption mostly vanishes. It does completely disappear because a custom ASIC will still bring some advantage, but it will be much smaller, we believe. Next slide, please. So Argon2 was a winner of recently ended last year password hashing competition. Next slide. And there is a brief picture of it. So there are two versions. One is mostly for proofs of work called Argon2D. The feature is it uses data-dependent addressing in the memory. Because of that, it has more security, because this memory addresses cannot be prefetched. And for special hardware, this is sort of another defense. But the data-dependent addressing poses some threat for password hashing because it gives another side channel information. So Argon2D is better for not password hashing, better for proofs of work, for cryptocurrencies. Argon2I, the best recommended for password hashing. And we use some parallelism there. We use some custom compression function there, but this is not very important properties. The important thing is we try to make it very fast and parallelizable as much as possible. You may also notice that we use a very non-trivial value for the block size. It's 8,000 bits. It's much different from regular hash function have, and that's also important. If our block size would be much smaller, we would be unable to fill the memory that fast, and that the function will be also less secure. Next slide, please. So since the last year we increased the total amount of memory that can be processed, we added some small enhancements to protect from memory optimization attacks, and we also a bit changed the way we take pseudo-random data from the memory. It only increases security, and we have some sort of proof experiments for this. Kenny, please. So we still are interested in feedback. In particular, should we use any internal compression function and hash function different than Blake2B? Because currently we use full hash function in the very beginning and in the very end. These two H are full hash functions. And they are now Blake2B because the internal compression function is Blake2B as well. So it's not no performance or security difference if we change H to another function, but for the sake of simplicity, we didn't do this. We don't propose it so far. That's possible though. We also use, we also impose lower bound restriction on salt, no less than 64 bits, because otherwise the collisions are probable and you can't anymore use random number generator. It doesn't guarantee you uniqueness with the reasonable probability. So we currently do not formally restrict password hashing to argon2i only, but it's also possible to do. So the good question is if anyone who is doing password hashing is not concerned with side channel information leakage. If there are people who do this on their machine and you know for sure that side channels are not a problem, then we'll continue recommending argon2d for password hashing. Next slide, please. So some people asked last time, what if we used argon2d with SHA-3, not only in the very beginning and very end, but say in the middle? What if we use SHA-3 Kecheck permutation, and what if we used full SHA-3 for internal hashing, for example, with variable output? Our answer is that if we use very reduced round Kecheck permutation, we may get the same speed, but the security for 3 rounds of Kecheck permutation, we believe it to be less than for Blake2B. For 6 rounds, the performance will be, the security will be about the same, but performance will be slower. And if you're going to employ the full Kecheck permutation or even the full SHA-3 hash function or some sort of shake variant of SHA-3 for this, then everything will be 5 or even 10 times slower. This essentially means that if you're going to use SHA-3 for every operation inside Argon2, you will weaken the security of your passwords. Or speaking other way, you will, to achieve the same security with non-SHA-3, you will have to spend 10 times more time for that. Next slide, please. So since last, in the last half of a year, there have been some discussions about the security of Argon2. And the 2 important points must be made on that. First, the collision and pre-image security of Argon2 has never been in question. So we use, in the beginning and the very end, the full Blake2B, and we have some sort of proof that the internal compression function is pseudo-random enough to guarantee that the absence of internal collisions. So no one has ever challenged the collision and pre-image security of Argon2. What has been challenged is that the so-called trade-off resistance of Argon2 or trade-off properties of Argon2. And so far we assumed that the trade-off resistance of Argon2 comes from public scrutiny because for somewhat ad hoc construction of Argon2, we cannot make really strong arguments about the trade-off security. But let me go a bit into details what the trade-off means here. So since we employ memory hard functions, so we compute, suppose we can compute Argon2 with space s and time t. But what happens if we use less space in order to save the chip area and eventually reduce the cost of dictionary attack on special hardware? Then for every function exists the so-called trade-off, the function time as a function of space. And if this function is linear, means that space can be equally traded for time, and this means that you can work with smaller chips with the same electricity consumption. This is the case for script, for example, and that's why Argon 2 is better than script. Argon 2 is better because the trade-off, the all existing trade-off are somewhat exponential, even if they're not proven to be so, but the best attacks demonstrated this quality. So trade-off has attack quality gamma is if the area time product can be reduced by the factor of gamma. So the time area product is a rough estimate for the running costs of password cracker. So in case of dictionary attack. And however, and if you demonstrate that you can have a very large gamma, this means that an attacker can reduce the time area product significantly and win in dictionary attacks. So the question is, what sort of gamma Argon 2 has, and whether it has increased with the recent attacks. Next slide. So the timeline is about as follows. So in 2014, when we worked on password hashing competition, we developed our own trade-off attacks called ranking attacks. And after that, applied them on Argon 2D. So the idea was to make the computing graph of low depth and by storing certain vertices, and thus save on the precomputation. The details are in the special papers. After we applied our method to Argon 2D and Argon 2I and have this quality values, we broadcasted it somewhat, and the community largely agreed, and eventually Argon 2 was selected as the winner with these numbers. Half a year later, a group of researchers with Corgan Gibbs and Don Benet, they published the so-called optimization attack, which had quality from 3 to 5, but it was quickly patched in the recent Argon 2 versions without any any performance penalty and other security penalty. So that's the version 1.3 that is currently in the standardization. In February, so like half a year ago, Alvin and Blocky published the so-called depth reducing attack or sandwich attack, which also demonstrated some trade-off values for Argon 2. And since then, there was no progress in attacks. So there was a timeline, but the question is, what are the actual numbers? So did Argon 2 become weaker over time or not? So the next slide, please. So here is the attacks on Argon 2I, because Argon 2D was not concerned at all. And here are the numbers. So 1 and 2 passes of Argon 2I over memory were not ever considered and recommended for practical use, because everyone knew that in the competition, in the passive hashing competition, for example, that for so small number of passes over memory and with data independent addressing, there always exists some sort of dangerous trade-off attacks. And we demonstrated it with our ranking attack in 2014. So we had an attack with quality 10 and for 1 pass, and with quality 4 for 2 passes. And this attack was sort of extended. For 3 passes, we had a trade-off with quality 2.5. So this means that if an adversary creates not a naive chip, but a special ASIC with a sophisticated trade-off algorithm inside, the best he can do is to win a 2.5 factor in time area product. After we demonstrated, so that was in 2014, and then the Alvin Blocky attacks appeared. They have different quality values for 1 and 6 gigabytes, depending on how much memory you use, but the numbers are as follows. So for 1 and 2 passes, the numbers are quite big, but the 1 and 2 passes were never recommended, and the numbers are smaller than what exists in the ranking attack. For 3, 4, and 5 passes, then the 1 gigabyte version wasn't attacked at all, so there's no benefit of the attack. And for 16 gigabytes, you can win a bit, but for 3 passes, for example, these attacks are worse than what we already had for the last 2 years. So the eventual contribution of all the attacks appeared in the last half a year, this winter, that for 4 and 5 passes with Argon 2 and 16 gigabytes, the adversary can win 20–40% or something. So this is, there are many more details in the Argon 2 specification, and what we consider also an important fact that there, since winter, there has been actually no progress in these attacks, and we feel quite confident that nothing much better than our 2.5 appears in the future. So to summarize, there was an attack in 2014 with good quality 2.5. There are other attacks that appeared quite recently, but they are in many aspects inferior to what we had before. So actually, we claim that the status of Argon 2 is actually unchanged. It's security margin. So next slide, please. There's some sort of summary of trade-off attack on different versions. For Argon 2D, you can, for example, win factor 1.5 with the same ranking method if you apply it for 1 pass Argon 2D. So we are also completely fine with this factor 1.5. And for Argon 2I, you can use some variant of the optimization attack, but it's never recommended, so might not be of concern. And for Argon 2I, when you use 3 or more passes over memory, you have attack with this quality for 3 passes, 1.8 and 2.5, and less than 1.4 for other numbers of passes. So of course, we suggest for some paranoid users using 5 or 6 passes of Argon 2. This will make it no more than 2 times slower, but all the existing attacks will be mitigated. So do you have a next slide?
No. No more.
Okay, so thank you for your attention, and I would be very welcome to answer your questions.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes for Q&A. Please come to the mic and state your name and ask your question.
Joran Scheffer, can you go back to the feedback slide?
Yes.
This one?
No, there was one entitled feedback.
Oh, feedback. Yeah, here.
Yeah. So some feedback. If this is moving from an academic paper into an actual IETF document, and eventually it will look like a standard, there need to be as few knobs as possible. So probably just one hash function, and if Blake2B is fine, then it's fine. Fine. As I know, that's a conservative choice. Probably, in my opinion, you shouldn't allow short salts. I don't know of a use case where that is really needed, such short salts. And I would say it should be data independent only, because people will implement stuff on virtual machines and will be susceptible to cache-based attacks. Personally, I have a bad feeling about this being so new, but I would leave that to our new crypto review board. I think having stuff that's only just been recently published and there are very, very recent attacks, it's a bit too new for actual deployment.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hello, Hanno Böck. I have a question about the salt. You said that you want the minimum size because the salt should... Hello? Okay. You said Hanno Böck, you said the salt should have the minimum size to avoid collisions. Now I wonder how severe is a collision in the salt, because if that's a severe problem, then I think 8 bytes are not enough, because there still could be collisions. And then another question, like we had a discussion in the OpenPGP group whether Argon 2 should go into the next OpenPGP standard, and the question came up if the current version is like the final version, or if it's expected that there will be changes due to the attacks that have been published.
Okay, so thank you for questions. So for the last question, we are not going to change anything anymore. So maybe only a sort of recommendations how many passes you use. For example, we added that 5 or 6 passes completely resolves all the possible attacks, but no more change in the specification since January happened, and we don't expect any more. The first question was about salts and 8 bytes. So actually, of course, for 8 bytes, collisions are still possible and, well, I wouldn't say likely, but possible. The danger is not that big, of course, but we don't recommend the salts of 8 bytes. We can't recommend salts of 16 bytes. And for this case, I think the collisions are unlikely for any reasonable web service.
Hi, Stephen Farrell, just kind of reiterating a bit what Yaron said. So I think in addition, there are a number of rounds and so on parameters in the document. And the document actually gives a kind of an algorithm for picking good choices. So I think, again, having no choices is going to be much better for people if you want this to get used. Because it's just easier to have a function with fewer inputs. And so, for example, in the IETF context, if you leave in a whole bunch of parameter choices, then lots of different working groups will just waste loads of time arguing about it between people who probably don't really understand them. So pick some sensible choices and say it's exactly this, this and this number of rounds, this size of salt, etc., etc. And then it's much more likely to get used.
Okay, thank you.
Antoine Drigna from MSR. I want to go back to one of the comments Hugo made about Argon 2D, the dependent version. It seems to be at this point do you know of any analysis that was done in terms of cache timing attacks or any in-depth analysis of Argon 2D, or all of the papers have actually focused on the 2I version?
Well, I didn't hear about anyone actually conducted a cache timing attack. But it's clear that in Argon 2D, if you have, so we fetch addresses in the data-dependent way, and if in any point you know the address from which the memory block is requested, then in dictionary attacks, the exhaustive search is much faster. So the search goes only up until the block where you have this side channel information. So whenever you have a side channel leak, you have a much faster brute force here.
I see. And from what I understand, you only propose to have one version of Argon 2D, right?
One version of Argon 2D and one version of Argon 2I.
But I mean, the dependent version always uses one single round.
Yes.
I see.
This is DKG from, so I'm one of the co-chairs of the OpenPGP working group, and I want to thank Hanno for pointing out that we want to use this if you think it's ready. In the next revision of the OpenPGP spec, I'm happy to talk with you later about what we would need to do to make it work. Mm-hmm. And I do also want to say that, yes, fewer parameters is better. Mm-hmm. If you want to make it down to there's one knob so that there's a extra hard setting and a not so hard setting, maybe we would consider that, but we really don't want to have to choose among a multi-dimensional array of choices.
Okay.
At implementation time, that is.
Okay, so thank you. Actually, that's some sort of some feedback that we need because we have thought for a while that when you choose the hash function for password processing, you have when you are on a server, you have in the mind, okay, I cannot spend more than 1/10 of a second per user. And given that bound, you select the parameters. Is that true, or?
So for OpenPGP, we are hoping to use this in a symmetrically encrypted data packet. So that is, imagine sending someone a document that's encrypted with a password.
Yes, password-based encryption, yeah.
Right. So this is not a situation where we are dealing with a server that needs to optimize how many password attempts can we check per second. This is a situation where whoever receives the document is going to have to spend a certain amount of, and we may or may not know what the receiving person, what resources they have available. So the decision-making process is different in the scenario where we are hoping to use this. So I'm happy to brainstorm with you about what that would mean, and let's come up with something reasonable, and then we can encode it as, you know, this is how you use it, and maybe there's one option, but I really don't want a lot more than that.
Okay, that would be great.
Okay, thank you everybody for the questions and comments. Any last questions or comments for Dimitri before we move on? Okay, great, thank you. So Dimitri's got some things to think about.
Sorry?
You have some things to think about now.
Yes,
Excellent.
I'm going to think
Okay.
right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Good, so we'll move on. So our next presentation is on the CESPIC protocol. This is a password authenticated key exchange. And let's see if I can do full screen. Okay, and the presentation is by Stanislav. Stanislav, you have 10 minutes, okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. My name is Stanislav Smishlev, CryptoPro, and my current talk is dedicated to the CESPIC protocol, which is now discussed in the CFRG mailing list. Please, next slide. So our original motivation was connected with securing the channel between cryptographic tokens or smart cards and the software parts in the cases when this interaction is made by Bluetooth channels or NFC communication or some remote channels. And if we want this to be suitable for end users, it must be protected by short secrets like passwords. And of course, it must be secure enough to be used with signature procedures, etc. This was our original motivations. And we had some general requirements like standard security models and requirements that are the same as in the current version of the draft of Jan Schmidt with requirements for PEG schemes. And we had some more requirements. Please, next slide. They were connected with the performance limitations on hardware tokens and with our will to standardize in our technical committee. So we had our proofs to be complete in the way that for the final implementations, we can just fix the parameters and have good security bound for the end implementation. And the same applies to the description itself. We wanted our definitions and descriptions of the protocol be complete enough to be implemented just out of the box, so that the protocol wouldn't need any additional sub-protocols to be invented for the implementation. And we think that these features are quite good for any PEG applications. Please, next slide. So we managed to suit all these requirements, and the result of our work was Russian standardized version of CESPIC protocol with Ghost algorithms, etc. And now we have a generalized version in the draft in IETF without any tying to Ghost. Please, next slide. And the core of the protocol is key exchange under SQPCCDH problem. It's just Diffie-Hellman on elliptic curves protected by the single password-dependent point of elliptic curve. I'll stress that there is only one point that depends on the password, so we must be some kind of economical if we deal with tokens, so we try to store as little data as we can. The established key is generated by hashing the result of Diffie-Hellman, and the key information part is quite conservative. It's just based on HMAX, and it's resistant against known attacks for SPAKE, for example, or reflection attacks, but there is nothing new, very innovative about this part. Please, next slide. So if we think about the process in CFRG, we have to say a lot of words about compliance to the requirements of the draft of Jan Schmidt. We've had a very fruitful discussion with him about the requirements, and we think that the current version of the draft is very good for to be approved. And I'd like to say some words about compliance of CSPEC to these requirements. For the first requirement about augmentation, we've had a very fruitful discussion with Sen-Kan Shin about the property of augmentation. And it must be said that spec is not augmented in its complete form, but there must be some remarks added. If you tell about augmentation, we talk about some additional tasks for the adversary if we have already attacked the server. And augmentation is a property that the adversary have to make some dictionary attack after this process. And it can be applied to two scenarios. The first scenario is when the attacker who compromised the server tries to impersonate the user or on this the same server. And yes, the spec is not doesn't add something else for the adversary in this scenario. But the second scenario, which is, as we think, more interesting for real life, is a scenario when the attacker who have compromised the server tries to impersonate the user on another server where the user has the same password. And the spec does something in this point. PBD-KDF2 is used for generation of parameters that is used through the protocol. And assault, that is kept by server, is used there. So we add some problems for the adversary in this point. Please, next slide. The main important point is about security. All known PEG protocols have good security proofs for the basic model, the model of distinguishing of the session key. And the question marks after PEG means only that there are some unclosed problems with the current version of security proofs, which was discussed through the mailing list by Mike Hamburg, us, and the authors, Sen-Kan Shin. And Sen-Kan said that the problem will be met in the following version in September. And the second lines about nodes is about the following. Please, next slide. If we look through the current version of requirement draft, you'll see a requirement to address the attack of false authentication attack in the security proof. Please, next slide. And we think that the key confirmation part must not only be included in the draft, in the document of PEG, but also must be addressed in the proofs. That there must be separate proofs for this case. Why it is important, as we think. If we talk about PEG protocols and prove the security, we always prove the more or less same thing, that the adversary cannot do more than guessing one password for one trial, for one attempt of communication with server. But if we proved it, we must be sure that the server always knows how many attempts were made. So if the key confirmation part is not strong enough and the adversary can make such a thing that he doesn't know the session key itself and doesn't know anything about it, but has some way to make the server believe that the key confirmation was successful, then the server wouldn't increment his counter and wouldn't know that there was an attack. So making the adversary available to provide enlightened password guessing attack. Please, next slide. So the final security estimation is on the slide, and if we fix some reasonable parameters for length of password, for number of attempts, etc., we'll have very good values of probability. Please, next slide. I'll go a little faster here. If to talk about requirements in the draft, CSPEC meets all requirements with mass and shoots, and about maze, I would like to talk in the end. Please, 3 more slides forward. Yes. 2 more things to talk about. We have explicit description how to deal with handles and with counters of false authentication on the server, because we think that it is crucial not only to build a good pack, but to also to define how it must be implemented in the crucial about security issues. So the draft contains all details that are crucial for the implementations, so that the server always knows how many attempts were made. It may be suitable for security considerations chapter. The next slide. And the last thing I would like to say it's about the performance. As I said in the beginning, we had a purpose to use it on the tokens, and we have very limited resources here. The numbers of the slide on the slide is about the time, not about the complexity itself. So we think that all operations that can be done in parallel and independent are done in parallel, and we try to decrease the total running time of the protocol because the user, of course, doesn't want to wait for 10 seconds for his signature operations to be done. So we try to decrease the total number is there. If to compare with PEC2, we have the same time, but we have only 1 point stored that is dependent on the password. Next slide. So we have security proven for 2 independent parts of the protocol. We have practice-oriented details, and we have, I think, very effective protocol. Please, next slide. The questions we'd like to raise are about 3 things. The first thing is about maze in the requirements draft. Do we really need optimization techniques described in the draft? Because these techniques are quite evident, and we've mailed the techniques in the mailing list, and we are not sure that we should include them in the draft itself. But of course, we'll do it if it's needed. About common anonymization methods, these methods are quite independent of PEC topic itself. So maybe they must remain independent. If to talk about known attacks on SPECI with some subtle and specific scenarios, maybe all of us, including LPEC and SPEC2, should address these subtle scenarios in the mailing list or is the security proofs, because they can be strange, but they must be addressed. And the last 2 points is about algorithms. Of course, in the current version, the algorithms, the draft doesn't contain any ghost algorithms in itself, but it has our previous examples, and now we must understand which algorithms and parameters we should be based on. Maybe on some modern parameters like ED25519 and algorithms like SHA3, or maybe if we deal with hardware parts, with something more conservative, as SHA2 and the NIST curves. And so the last question is whether we should fix the algorithms in the document, whatever, for our document or the final PEC document for CFRG, should we fix the algorithms that we use, or just leave this question open and have some options? This is all. Thank you very much. I'll be thankful for any questions, comments.
Thank you. Questions or answers to the questions? Or comments? Let me ask one to get the ball rolling. So you have a security proof for your scheme. Has it been peer reviewed by the academic community?
Yes, but it was inside Russian community, so it was reviewed inside Russian community, inside Russian journals. So the answer is yes, but not in some worldwide journal, but inside Russia.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Rich Sauls. I just want to make a comment. Russia has a large, good, how do I say it? A vibrant and impressive history of mathematics. So it's really great to see some of these things coming forward to the larger internet community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Rich. We'll just wait a second in case somebody gets struck by inspiration. There we are. Here we go.
Hi, this is Hannes. It's just a very basic question. So where do you expect this work to get used ultimately? Like in what application domain?
If you talk about our motivation, not about the tokens, as I said in the beginning, we think that the most important area where PEX protocol can be used is remote access to some storage of the keys or some remote server, etc., that must be accessed from any machine. So if you have some key server and your private key is stored on a server, like maybe conforming to European Council requirements, you should be able to access them from any machine you can use, and you are sure that there is no virus on it, and it'll be very good if you don't require any token or any anything besides that you can remember, because in all applications when you already have the key on a token or somewhere else, of course you don't have PEG itself. You must have PEG in only one set of scenarios, when the only thing you have is your head. So it's scenarios of accessing the keys, and then just using your keys after authentication on them using PEG. And I think it's applicable not only to PEGs, to SysPEG, but to all PEGs.
Okay, if there are no more comments or questions, then I think we should move on.
Thank you.
Stanislav, what you might want to do is bring these questions on the slide to the list and seek feedback for them there. Maybe one at a time or a small number at a time instead of all at once. Okay, let's move on to the next presentation. Thank you. So next up, we have a presentation, let me just bring it up, here we go, on HEMO. I'm not going to explain what HEMO is. Oscar is going to do that, but just to say that Oscar contacted us, the CFRG chairs, asking whether he could have a short slot to introduce these ideas. We looked at the slides and we thought it would be interesting for CFRG to hear about. And so keep that context in mind as Oscar is giving his presentation.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for giving the opportunity of talking here. This work that we have been doing at Philips, and first of all, is about the goal of this presentation. The goal of this presentation is to inform about the work that we have been doing. So now we are going to start submitting internet drafts or whatever, just to tell what we have been doing and how such a scheme, HEMO, or maybe another one with similar operational properties will be useful for our use cases, yeah? And obviously we would like to get feedback about the work. So the talk basically contains about key distribution schemes. I will try to explain what HEMO is, how it could be used, and then I will talk about the HEMO contest. So that's basically the presentation about. So next slide. The part we used to work on wireless and SON networks. Wireless and SON networks, then there were lots of key distribution schemes, yeah? And key distribution schemes basically means that there is TTP, trusted third party, and you have a bunch of nodes. Basically, in the TTP, you have a setup phase in which a master secret is generated. Then you have a struct phase in which basically each of the nodes receives a secret function. And that secret function depends on the identifier of the node. So when you want a pair of devices to communicate with each other, basically you have a key establishment phase in which, for instance, if Carsten and I have registered with same TTP, then I will be putting basically the identity of Carsten in my function, and Carsten will be doing the same thing, and then we will be generating a symmetric key. Symmetric key that can be used for communication, and we are also verifying our identities. Next slide, please. So this for the wireless and networks, it's a very nice approach because it's efficient. Any node can directly obtain a pathway key to another device. is based on the identity, so that it's possible to verify them. You can have a TTP, but you can also have multiple TTP, so that a single TTP does not have access to all the keys. The main drawback, at least in the area of sensor networks, was that was a known-to-us scheme with those operational properties that is also collision resistant. Yeah, so maybe you have another scheme that is collision resistant, but very less efficient. So our goal with the HIMO was to achieve such a scheme that is also collision resistant and also very efficient. Next slide. So this is the specification of HIMO, specified in a slightly different way that we have in papers outside. So basically matrix vector notation. And what is important, if you go to the next slide, is that in the setup phase, basically the TTP generates some secret information that basically some secret symmetric matrices of coefficients and secret moduli, QI. Then that resembles some other schemes that are in the literature known. For instance, the Blom scheme has some similarities, but there is a single QI, or Blundo that was using polynomials. So here the main innovation is basically the different QIs that introduces some mixing of modular operations. And that mixing is actually performed during the start phase, in which basically we combine that information to generate a identity vector. So a device has identity vector and is assigned a key generating vector that depends on the secret information of the TTP and the identity vector. So with that, by following the procedure that is described there, we can make sure that any pair of devices can directly generate a symmetric key. Yeah, so you can imagine that if you all have registered with the TTP, any pair of you could directly, based on the identities, generate a symmetric key. Next slide, please. So in practice, how HIMO will work is that the TTP has some secret information and basically assigns to a device, the blue one over there, that has identity vector X, secret function XX. Next slide, please. If you have two devices, X and Y, in the same system, what this will allow is that X can directly send a message that is encrypted and authenticated to Y by using the symmetric key that was generated between both nodes. Next slide. Furthermore, since it's based on identities, and the key generation depends on the identity, Y can directly verify the identity vector of Y, and also, for instance, if that identity vector is generated from a set of credentials, so for instance, or parameters, access roles, or the manufacturing date of a device, those informations could be also directly verified. And here we have to understand that we come from a world in which we are working with kind of IoT, and then this will be extremely useful. This is one way key generation and verification. Next slide. We can have a TTP, we can have multiple TTPs. That's important because if we have a single TTP, then the TTP has access to all communications. If a device is registered with multiple TTPs, the device can combine two secret functions, so that basically a single TTP does not have access to the communications. But the combination of the TTP, if all the TTPs collude, then basically they will have access to the communications, yeah? Next slide. And finally, that's also, till now, I was explaining basically how HIMO will be used for confidentiality and authentication. That's some recent idea in which we were using actually HIMO for verifying public keys. So if you have a public key exchange, yeah, and the public key that you exchange anyhow to generate a public key, a symmetric key, that public key is also seen as a HIMO identifier, and the identifier is linked to a symmetric key. Basically, then in the communication, you can generate two keys, one derived from the public key exchange, another one derived from HIMO. And then if afterwards you have a public key, a mutual authentication handshake based on that generated key, then implicitly you are verifying that the HIMO key was correct. Implicitly you are verifying that the public key was correct, and implicitly you are verifying that the public key that was used was kind of signed or certified by the TTP. So that would be a lightweight way of verifying public keys because exchange of certificates is not needed. And you can also have basically those public keys certified by multiple TTPs without actually increased communication overhead. So that was not the original use case for HIMO, but that's also something that can be done by means of HIMO. Next slide. So attack paths and security analysis. When we came up with the idea of HIMO, we had the problem that was basically how to establish keys in a large network. So we came up with the idea of HIMO. We don't have a formal reduction. But in the end, let's say what HIMO is, I mean, do is the following. So let's imagine that you all have registered with the TTP, and let's imagine that an attacker has managed to compromise all of you except you. Yeah. So ideally, what HIMO should provide is that the attackers will not be able to, compute. And yesterday we had a long discussion with me about this. The key that is shared between the two non-compromised devices. Yeah. So that's the goal of HIMO, and if I believe that for some IoT scenarios, it would be extremely useful to have. So we have studied different paths, one to attack HIMO, and other people have also analyzed. So basically, to try to recover basically that key, one path is basically to try to attack the TTP and all the information that the TTP has. Yeah. Another path is basically to recover the key generating the secret vector of a device, and therefore also that key. Another path is to attack basically only that key. So that is basically described in that paper, and in the next weeks we will have an update of that one. Next one. So for all the attacks, basically HIMO comes from two problems. It's high and MMO. High is hiding information, and MMO is mixing modular operations. Those are published in this journal in a conference. So basically, for high means that you are given many keys or and they're consuming data. Basically, what is difficult is to find the key material for node or the key of another pair of non-compromised devices. Yeah. And for the MMO, it basically relates more to the part of the TTP in which you are also given the key materials of many devices. And there, what is difficult is basically to find back the root key material of the TTP, basically all those functions that the TTP has. Next slide, please. So last year, we announced a contest during the NIST workshop on post-quantum crypto. The reason for this was because that was suggested by Tanya Lange, and also some people from NIST also said that would be a good idea to have a further verification. So that's online, that's there. We had the first phase at the end of this year. We got, can you go to the next slide? We got some feedback. We had an update of parameters, and there are new challenges online. So since we first published this, 2012, I have tried to advertise this as much as possible. So I went to lots of crypto colloquium and different universities looking for feedback, and that's also the reason why I'm here today. So far last year, the challenge was downloaded something like 30 times. This year, something like 4 times. And we know that some universities have looked into it with more or less effort. Some agencies have also looked into it, that we are so also we don't know how much effort. And we also know that some corporates are looking into it. There is also an implementation for research purposes available, and in the website you have all the information that you want to get about HIMO. Yeah. Next slide. So these are the channels that you have there for different parameters. There is a parameter B that determines the size of the generated key. And there is a parameter T that determines the number of coefficients that you have in the function that the device receives, and basically breaking one of the challenges basically has a price of 1,000 euros. So, and here what you have is the time for key agreement and verification of a set of credentials. So that's for
You have to stay at the mic. Sorry.
yeah, that's for so let's say for the second challenge that will be under 1 millisecond. And it's well under 1 second. Yeah, for the here. And next slide. I think I'm getting to the end. Yeah, the last thing is there was not the original goal, but all the attacks that are known against Himo are based on lattices. So at some point of time, people said, well, if it's all the attacks are based on lattices, and maybe Himo will be interesting candidate, a quantum resistant candidate. Yeah. So the security estimates that we put here is basically a classical security level for 80 bits, or quantum basically generating a 256 bits long key, so that can be used in AES-256, and we basically the T parameter that is required. And here, when I write a number of Himo instances, the meaning is that you have lots of Himo instances generating small keys, but that all of them are put in parallel. And here, these estimates, security estimates, will be also in the next paper draft that we put outside. And here, what you can also use is if you want to achieve a one-way key exchange or one-way key exchange and edit authentication, the number of bytes that will be required for that exchange. And with this, I'm done. And if you have questions, then I will be glad to answer them. And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Stay at the mic. Okay. So we have plenty of time for questions and comments. Don't forget to state your name.
Dmitry Kovatovich from Luxembourg. So I have two questions. So first, the problems that you mentioned, are they just standard conjectures, or they're reducible to some other well-known problems?
So the problems that we have there, basically, in the end, it relates to finding a sort vector, finding a closed vector in lattice, yeah? So all of them relate to, are lattice-based problems. The thing is that for the high-end MMO, that's the case. However, those are two problems, yeah? And then we still have Himo. And there we don't have any clear way of having a reduction, yeah? So we don't have a reduction for Himo as such, as a whole.
Okay, and the second question is, you mentioned that there are some reviews already finished. Are they available somewhere?
Well, the reviews, basically, actually, you are from Luxembourg. A colleague of yours, Monsoon Lee, you know him? Monsoon Lee? He was very engaged. So first he was based in South Korea. Last year in September, he moved to Luxembourg. He was very engaged in the contest last year, yeah? Basically, the results of his attack, because he found a very clever attack, basically it's in the in the last paper that we have in the e-print. So that's the description is there, and we will update the description in the next weeks also. So that's basically what is outside.
So what is the...
Can you state your name, please?
Sorry, Victor Duchovny. Is this intended to be a replacement for Kerberos or something? Where are you going with this?
Well, I mean, there are different ways of using it, yeah? Thinking about wireless and network, that is basically the application that we have. We just think that if you are a manufacturer and then you put these functions there and you really have the property that an attacker can compromise any set of them, and then still the non-compromised devices can directly generate a symmetric key, that would be extremely useful because the devices can be deployed and they work out of the box. If those identities are linked to some parameters, for instance, I'm a door locker or I'm a light switch, then things like doing access control will be much easier. And that's basically the original motivation of this book, yeah? Where it could land, I can imagine that could land in many different places. That's not our intention now. Basically, this is just to discuss it, say what we did, get feedback from you, and I'm pretty sure, I mean, if, I believe that there are lots of replications, yeah? And the one that we started is the one I'm telling you is about IoT.
Bob Moskowitz, HT Consulting. Oscar, have you presented this to any other IoT community with highly constrained process devices? Particularly, I'm thinking AutoSAR for CAN bus FD, where they're struggling with a number of different key distribution, key establishment methodologies, and I'm wondering where else you have presented this technology, as well as a larger in terms of the security review beyond your paper, any others with regard to that?
So we have presented this in academia. I mean, as I said, we went to a bunch of universities. We presented it at Crypto Colloquium at NIST years ago. Presented it in workshops also organized by NIST. So we published the high-end MMO papers. The integration of HIMO with TTLS was published in ESORIX last year. So, I mean, we have done our effort to publish it. We have also discussed with some other companies that I cannot disclose due to non-confidentiality issues. And yeah, I mean, people, agree that it will be a very interesting solution. Let's put it this way. That's clear. And for further security analysis beyond us, we know that people don't know the challenges. Monsoon Lee, last year, you can see online that he managed, so he attacked the system. That's online. We know that other people have looked into it. Those have not published anything, yeah? So either because, I don't know, so they can break it and they want to keep it for themselves, or because they cannot break it. That I don't know. But I mean, for sure, we have the contest online so that people look into it, yeah? So that's what, I mean, we believe that such a script will be useful. Does it answer your question?
Thank you.
Hi, Stephen Farrell. So one of the things about kind of new crypto that can sometimes be off-putting is when there's IPR encumbrances. And what's the situation here? Is there something you can say or not?
My employer has IPR, but I mean, we think that if we are here, it's not because we want to keep it for ourselves. Yeah. I just have ideas. That has not been disclosed. Someone else will do it. I will not do it. So I mean, I'm plain researcher.
Okay, so we have to move on. Thank you very much for the presentation and the comments. Great stuff. We're going to now have a brief update. Thank you on Cryptech. Let me bring up the slides for that. Here we go. Okay, thank you. So, Rob.
Hi, Rob Osstein. I'm with the Cryptech project. I've only got 5 minutes, so I'm going to talk fast. I'm going to skip all the history about how we got here and what a wonderful bunch of people we are. It's all on the website. There's the URL. I'm just going to talk about the new cool toy. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have this thing we're calling the Alpha board. It's our first attempt to actually make a chunk of hardware for this project. And basically what it is, it's an open source platform for doing HSM. I'll get into that in a little more detail. But the important part here is it's all open source. The design for the board is open source, the software is open source, the Verilog is open source, it's all open source. You can get the schematics, you can build your own if you think you can produce it cheaper than we can, whatever. Please steal this design. We want people to use this stuff. It's an international team, not just people from the Five Eyes. We have some Russians, we have some Americans, we have some Germans, and we have a bunch of Swedes. And we've had walk-ins, like we got this guy in Israel who just keeps sending us advice. It's actually a lot of fun. It's all composable. If you like parts of our design, you don't like other parts of our design, that's fine. Use the bits that are useful to you. And we do have boards available, but you don't need to use them if you want to build your own. That's fine. We don't care. We're happy to have this stuff used anyway. We did have a workshop just prior to this IETF meeting, and we were doing the usual obvious tests with DNS zone signing. It went pretty well, found a few new bugs, normal for a development project. Next slide, please. Okay, so it's important to stress this. This is not an HSM. It's missing a whole bunch of things you want on an HSM, like, say, a tamper envelope, sensors to tell when someone has breached the tamper envelope. It doesn't have that. Okay, this is a development board. If you're familiar with the way things work in the embedded systems industry, it's very common to have demo boards that you can just get from the manufacturer and you can play with it, and it's not quite what you want, but it's close enough to what you're looking for. You can do your initial development on it, figure out what you really need to do, and then build your own. And that's essentially the model here. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the main stuff that's actually on the board. There's a honking big FPGA because we want to make sure there was room to play with a lot of Verilog stuff. It's actually a fairly expensive chip. A lot of, like, at least a quarter of the total price of the hardware as we're producing it is just that FPGA chip. Production, you might want a smaller one if you can fit it in, but we want to be able to play with parallel stuff. It's got a cool noise generation source. It's a off-the-shelf components. It's a noisy diode because we've been assured by people who think they know that that's the only thing that actually works. It's a very simple, cheap circuit to make, and it has the interesting property that all hardware-based noise sources that we know of eventually degrade. And the question is, how does it degrade? This one we think has the interesting property that you get less, you get fewer useful bits out of it as it degrades, but the bits that you do get are still useful, as opposed to getting a lot of useless bits. We thought that was a better way to do it. So the interface to the thing is UART speaking serial protocol. Yes, it's very, very old school, but it's also a small attack surface that was deliberate. It's got kind of what you'd expect. It's got some flash, it's got some RAM. The master key that stores the symmetric key that you use to encrypt all the stuff that's in the flash, that master key lives in RAM with a battery backup, so that when something tampers, you wipe the master key and then no one can actually decrypt the flash, even if they have the flash in their possession. You hope. It depends on the strength of the algorithms, but usual problem. Yeah, and there's an ARM, there's a Cortex ARM processor for just conventional stuff that isn't in the FPGA. The mix between what gets done on the ARM and what gets done in the FPGA is ever changing, and it's kind of a fun, another one of these fun design trade-offs. Next slide, please. The algorithms currently supported, this is all pretty boring conventional stuff. It's what you need to do if you're going to support DNSSEC zone signing. We're using AES key wrap to actually encrypt the keys in the flash. And we're using a couple of algorithms inside the random number generator that's using that noise source. And PBKDF2 for the pins, yeah. And we're going to be doing more algorithms, but this is the basic stuff we needed for the initial test stuff. Next, please. Okay, the communication interface is a trivial RPC protocol, not SUN RPC, but it's a remote procedure call protocol. Over that, one of those UARTs we mentioned. And then we're doing PKCS11 on top of that. And we may end up doing other interfaces on top of the RPC protocol. We're also planning on providing Python interface directly to the RPC protocol, that sort of thing. The other port is used for a management interface. It's a console. It's a little buggy at the moment, but it basically looks like a Cisco router console because there's a free package we're able to use that provided all that stuff for us, so we just have to add the commands to it. And that's open source as well, of course. Next, please. Okay, next stuff we're looking at, we don't have any key backup yet. That's an obvious omission. So we need to do something about that. We need MFN, which involves more USB ports probably for people who want to have, it takes 2 or more people to actually use the HSM. More algorithms, so SHA-3, other curves, and we actually have an AES core that we're using as part of the random number generator, but there's no driver for it to actually use it for symmetric encryption and anything else, so we'll probably add a driver for that. We may add other symmetric algorithms, it's not urgent. And we're planning on doing some experiments to see if we can get the speed of the thing up. There are 2 main approaches available for the modular exponentiation core we've got right now for RSA. One is to jack up the clock rate on the FPGA for that core. The other one is to run parallel cores. So we're going to try both of those. That's one of the reasons we needed this big, expensive FPGA. Next, please. That's about it. Discussion on the tech list. You can read all about how wonderful we are and the project goals on the website. I'm happy to take questions if we have time, but I had 5 minutes, so I was trying to get through it quickly.
Thank you very much, Rob. We have time for 1 or 2 questions if there are any. Otherwise, we'll wait for, here's Ecker.
What's your story about?
Who are you, Ecker?
I think we just established that.
Could you state your name, please?
Eric Riscola.
what's the story about uploading new firmware onto the thing?
Sorry, one more time.
What's the story about uploading new firmware onto the?
Uploading new firmware. We do actually have a mechanism for doing that over the console. You can also, of course, for development, we're doing it over an ST link, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's certainly a feature you can remove in production if you want to. At the moment, we're in development mode, so handing people boxes and saying, "Oh, you're stuck with last year's crappy bug," seems like a bad plan.
Sure. So the reason I'm asking is conventionally what you want with a device like this is some mechanism that allows you to load new firmware without destroying all the keys, but you don't want anyone to be able to load new firmware. So have you any thought of that part of it?
We should talk.
Okay.
Yeah, the answer is probably yes, but we should talk about details.
Thanks, Eric. I guess we should move on. We only have 10 minutes left. Thank you very much, Rob. Next up is Phil Hallam-Baker, who's going to tell us about proxy re-encryption. I'm looking for your slides. Here we go.
Okay, so before I start, yeah, I'm Phil Hallam-Baker, Komodo. The stuff I'm not presenting anything that I've invented here. In fact, Matt Blaze gave us a talk on this 20 years ago, which is significant because this stuff is now out of patent, or mostly. There are a couple of things that expire in about 18 months. Next slide. So the thing here is that this is a primitive that we haven't been using to date that turns out to be massively useful. There's a lot of exotic crypto out there. If you look at applied cryptography, you know, you've got 2 inches of exciting exotic crypto, and we maybe use about 1/4 of an inch of that book. This isn't actually in that book, but it is actually useful. So what is proxy re-encryption? Well, basically the idea of re-encryption is you can have a delegate, and that delegate has the ability to take one encrypted message that's sent to one recipient and convert it into a message that can be read by a different recipient, but does not have the ability to decrypt the message. I'm not going to go into exactly how it's done because I've only got 5 minutes, but there are various ways that you can do it. It's easiest to explain for Diffie-Hellman. There are ways you can do it for RSA. But the key thing is that if you're dealing with a cloud service, you've now got interesting things that the cloud service can do without putting your private keys at risk and without compromising the end-to-endness of your crypto protocol. So go to the next slide. So why it's useful for me as a protocol designer is this allows me to solve a lot of problems that I couldn't solve earlier and that I see as an impediment to deploying things like end-to-end secure email. So for example, mailing lists. If you have a mailing list, the naive way that you do a mailing list is everybody on the mailing list knows the public key of everybody else on the mailing list, and every time you send a message, you have to encrypt it to all the 10,000 people on your mailing list, which obviously has a scalability problem. And then the next one is, well, the mailing list has the private key of the mailing list, and then that's sitting out there on Gmail or Yahoo Mail or whatever, receiving mails, decrypting them and sending them on. Well, that sounds like a bad idea in this age of we know about mass surveillance. So that's a liability issue. So the idea here is I want to be able to have a mailing list that has the ability to do end-to-end encryption to a set of participants that's controlled by an administrator and preserve that end-to-end security. And you can do that with this proxy re-encryption. Another one is in an IMAP or a POP server. Say I've got 6 phones and laptops and so on, and I want to be able to read my mail on every single one, but I don't want to have 6 PGP keys or 6 S-MIME certificates that people have to encrypt to. I don't want people to know I have that many gadgets. I can upload to the server the set of recryption keys, and the server can do the recryption to the particular device I'm reading the mail on, and now I can do end-to-end encryption to any of my 6 devices without having to have the same decryption key on each of the devices, which is of course bad if I lose one. There's a very important one for CRM. If you want to have encrypted documents and you want to have a file server and everybody on the food project has access to those documents, and you don't want Snowden, who's managing that system, to have access to the documents, you can do that as well. That's the piece where that patent comes in that expires in about 18 months. So we go to the next slide. So the reason I brought it up here is I'm looking at this as an incredibly useful primitive. And there's a bit of, there's information there in the literature, but what I'm really interested in is which are the best of these proxy re-encryption schemes to use? How do we use them with the new elliptic curve systems that, how best do we use them with these new elliptic curve algorithms that we're talking about? How do we get it implemented in toolkits so that we can use it? This is incredibly useful primitive that I hope that people will start using. But I want to start the discussion about how we use it. And that, I think, needs to start here. So are there any questions?
So thank you, Phil. Are you saying you've discovered a crypto primitive that's not in OpenSSL?
Do you think that that would be surprising to you?
It's a joke. All right, serious questions, please.
Hi, this is Daniel Kahn-Gilmore. We talked about this a little bit earlier, not in the meeting, but one of the downsides of this arrangement is that anyone who controls one of the keys that is being re-encrypted to, who can also get access to the recryption key on the central redistribution agent, can unlock any of the other, can actually unlock the original, the master key.
Okay.
And I just want to make sure that people are aware of this particular trade-off.
Okay, that particular trade-off is a trade-off. That's a limitation that's a limitation of the scheme that I described over dinner. One of the reasons I wanted to raise it here is when I'm looking at the papers in the literature on proxy re-encryption, there are people saying, we've got to get this perfect so that I can send a message that can be recrypted to somebody's existing PGP key, whatever, without them having to change it, which is not something that I care about. But that piece that you're talking about there, which is, does the proxy re-encryption key plus some other key allow you to recover the private key of the group? If somebody could come up with a proxy re-encryption scheme that had protection against that attack, now that is something that I'd be very interested in indeed. And so it's a question of talking to the theory people and saying, look, if we're going to use these in protocols, there's some things that we care about, and there's others that we don't. And then reading through the literature, the thing that the problem that you're trying to solve is not one that I really need, but there are others that I do.
Final remarks or comments? Okay, we're actually out of time, so thank you very much, Philip. Does anybody want to come to the mic with any last bit of business? Oh yeah, go ahead. We have time. Yeah, go for it, yeah.
So I'm Kyle Rose, one of the chairs of TCP Inc. A few weeks ago, my co-chair, David Black, recommended to one of the authors of one of the drafts in my working group that they wanted to reference RFC 4086. And I said, I've never read that. Let me go read that. How many people here have read RFC 4086 or looked at it? Okay. It claims to be a best practices document, but it is not written like a best practices document. It seems in reality today, 95% of implementers, when they're asked, when they're looking for randomness, the answer is use the OS's entropy source and HKDF and you're done. And that is the best practice. But this document doesn't have that because it was written back in 2005. And even the similar thing that it has there, which is X9.82, is buried in section 7. And there's no indication to implementers that that's what they should be looking for. So I'm mostly talking about this because I'm wondering if there's any renewed interest in writing a replacement for that I know that there was some interest on the randomness mailing list a couple of years ago, but it kind of died out. So
Stephen Farrell, I think Don Eastek also has offered to get around to it a few times, but it hasn't so far. But I would say if folks are interested, chat with Don as well.
Yeah, another thing that came up that's related in another place. So we were talking about the SHA-1 issue and sticking randomness in serial numbers to defeat the attacks on SHA-1. And there's a lot of times that we use randomness in protocols that are maybe what you need is not randomness, but defeating the ability of the other side to control an output. And being precise about when you need randomness and when you need other properties is also pretty important.
Right, but I mean, I'm talking specifically about the issue of using something as an informative reference, an informational reference that is not actually telling implementers what they need to know, or it's in there, but you can't find it.
So this is DKG. I really like your concise framing of what implementers need to know when it's seen as what implementers of a given network protocol need to know. Saying use a system entropy source to someone who's implementing a system is a little bit of a chicken and egg situation. So I do think that there is still room for guidance for system implementers to be able to have that. So I don't know how to carve that difference, but if someone's revising it, I hope that they wouldn't throw actual system implementers totally under the bus. There's been a bunch of work recently on improving the entropy provided by the Linux kernel itself that could use guidance from this kind of community.
Right, and I think that there's some space for maybe examples in there of where you would find entropy sources in the OS that are appropriate. But it's, you know, like there's a section, it seems to be, there's a whole section in 4086 on like information theory that an implementer is going to read and just be like, what the hell is this? Right? You know, it's like I can't find the mix function in libc, right? It's not useful to an implementer, right? And so if you're gonna provide, or if you want people to reference a document to find out what best practice is, it has to be best practice at the level that the implementer is working at.
This is Hannes. I think what you're saying is that there are different target audiences for such a document, and specifically the target audience that you're looking for is actually not in a document. It's written for some other people, and clearly, like if you there was a cryptech project previously. If you're developing an IoT system, it's a very different audience and different consideration than using a general purpose operating system that comes already, like even if you are implementing something at that level, you may already have hardware support. You don't need to build it your own with your own circuits. And if you are an application developer writing some web application, there's a completely different story to this. And so.
Okay. I'm going to cut things off. We've got one more announcement I want to hear, and thank you very much for that contribution. What I suggest, if people are interested in discussing that further, why not come to the front of this room at the end of the meeting and form a little get-together and go off somewhere and find a space and start discussing. I think it'd be a really valuable piece of work. So very last thing, go ahead.
Stephen Thomas, Ripple. I newbie here. I wanted to quickly tease a BOF session we're having tomorrow, the ledger session. There is a part of that work which might be interesting to some of you. Namely, when we first started working on this, basically doing payments in an internet way, we ran into a problem where there wasn't a good multi-signature standard that we could just adopt for basically having multiple keys and thresholds of those keys sign things. There were a couple of solutions out there around like JWTs, some other standards, but they're always very specifically tied to one particular protocol or one particular toolkit. There wasn't anything that had sort of the outside interface of a crypto system. So basically you have keys, you have signatures, and it just so happens that that key belongs to not just one person, but like it's actually 3 keys internally or inside. And that signature isn't just one signature, it's actually 3 signatures. And so we basically constructed a scheme where what you're giving as the key, as the public key, is essentially a fingerprint, a hash of the public key, along with some information about what type of crypto system.
I don't think you have time to describe the scheme now. Why not just advertise your BOF session tomorrow?
Okay, well, so cool Merkle stuff tomorrow at 2 p.m. at the Ledger BOF.
I think it's 420. 420.
Sorry, 420.
In Potsdam 1.
All right.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, everybody. Blue sheets, please. Please sign the blue sheet before you leave. And could somebody bring it to me at the front? I'd be most grateful. Thank you, everybody. Thanks a lot. There's Alexi. Oh, I've got the blue sheet.
Yeah.
Blue sheets here?
You expecting me?
Kind of, yeah.
Hi, great. Hi, yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it stopped squeaking near the end of the session. It's very helpful.
Kenny, if somebody wants to write up a randomness thing as a PCB, I'd be happy to sponsor it, or CFRG informational thing would be fine too.
Yeah, I think it'd be really good to do because that document is pretty
I'd
sad.
say I'd page,
It's pretty sad.
Don has said a number of times. It's, I guess,
Dan Harkins?
No, Don Easley.
Don Easley. Okay, cool. Yeah, cool. Okay.
But he has,
yeah.
So
Can we do some arm twisting, perhaps? Be good.
I think if we could find a new set of editors,
A new set of
that's
people.
going to be better.
Yeah. Well, hopefully something might come out of this.